day, I listen to the harrowing stories of people fleeing for their lives across dangerous borders and friendly seas. But there's one story that keeps me awake at night, and it's about Doa. She's a Syrian refugee, 19 years old, once an aspiring student, thinking only of her future, is now scared all the time. But she was also full of hope, because she was in love with a fellow refugee named Bassam, and he said to Doa, "Let's go to Europe and seek safety and asylum there." But they knew to get to Europe, they had to put their lives in the hands of some notorious smugglers and travel across the Mediterranean Sea. And Doa? She never learned to swim. Washington. President Trump on Friday closed the nation's borders to refugees from all around the world. Already 2,000 people had died trying to cross the Mediterranean. But Doa knew of a friend who had made it all the way to Northern Europe, and she thought, maybe we can too. It was a Saturday morning when the call came. 500 of them were crammed onto a small boat. Syrians, Palestinians, Africans, Muslims, Christians, and children. Trump also established a religious test for refugees from Muslim nations. They were sick with worry and sick to their stomachs from the rough sea, and the passengers were getting agitated. Asking them to all disembark, they saw a boat approach. The parents were terrified for their children, and they collectively refused to disembark. So the boat sped away, but instead came into their ship. And Doa saw as a boat started ramming a hole in the side of their ship. And then she heard how they yelled, "Let the fish eat your flesh," and they started laughing as that boat sank. "We don't want them here," Mr. Trump said of Islamic terrorists. "We only want to admit those into our country who will support our country and deeply love our people." Doa was holding on to the side of a boat as it sank, and she saw in horror as a small child was cut to pieces by a propeller. And she couldn't swim. Bassam fell overboard, but he found a life ring. Around them were corpses. Around 100 people survived initially, but some gave up hope. Mr. Trump explained to an interviewer that Christians in Syria were horribly treated. And if you were Muslim, you could come, but if you were a Christian, it was impossible. Let me take a pause in the story right here and ask this question. Why do refugees like Doa take these types of risks? Millions of refugees are living in exile. Even if they wanted to return, they couldn't. Their cities had been completely destroyed. So people continue to flee into neighboring countries. The Syrian refugee war has driven almost 4 million people over its borders, and over 7 million people are on the run inside the country. This means that more than half of the Syrian population has been forced to flee. Back to Doa and Bassam in the water. Bassam was getting weak. And Doa said to Bassam, "My love, please hold on to our hope, to our future, we will make it." And he reached to her and he said, "I'm sorry, my love, that I put you in this situation. I have never loved anyone as much as I love you." And he released himself into the water, and Doa watched as the love of her life drowned before her eyes. The executive order suspends the entry of refugees into the United States for 120 days and directs officials to determine additional screening. Later that day, a mother came to Doha with her small 18-year-old baby, Masa. "Please take my child, I will not survive." And then she went away and drowned. The order also stops the admission of refugees from Iraq, Syria, Iran, Sudan, Libya, Somalia, and Yemen. So Doha, the 19-year-old refugee who was terrified of the water, who couldn't swim, found herself in charge of little baby. Around them, bodies were blazing and turning black. It's very frightening. But that afternoon, as the sun was going down, she saw a boat. And finally, the searchlights found her and they extended a rope, astounded to see a woman clutching onto a baby. Only 11 people survived that wreck of the 500. Human rights activists rightly condemn Mr. Trump's actions. Meanwhile, on a pediatric hospital on Crete, little Masa was on the edge of death. But amazingly, she survived. And soon the Greek press started reporting about the miracle baby who had survived 4 days in the water without any food or water. And meanwhile, Doha was in another hospital on Crete, thin and dehydrated. Messages started coming in, and one of those messages said, "I believe you have found my little niece, Masa." And this is from Masa's uncle, a Syrian refugee who had made it to Sweden. And Doha? Well, word went around about her survival. No one could imagine how she could survive all this time under such conditions in that sea and still save another life. She wants to go to Sweden and reunite with her family there. But I have to ask, why did she have to go through all that risk? And what happened next? Well, that's largely Europe's choice, and I understand that public fears. People are afraid about their security, their economies, the changes of culture. But one thing is for sure, no migrant would take that dangerous journey if they had enough food for themselves and their children. And no one would put their life savings in the hands of those notorious smugglers if there was a legal way to migrate. So on behalf of little Masa, Doha, Bassam, and those 500 passengers who drowned with them, can we make sure we take a stand for a world in which every life matters?